Love is heavy and light, bright and dark, hot and cold, sick and healthy, asleep and awake. It's everything except what it is.
Hello and welcome to Romance Isn't Dead. It's alive and well on my bookshelf, episode 1. I'm Sally.
And I'm Ray.
Y'all, we have decided to do a podcast on romance that's much... is reviled a good word?
Maligned?
Maligned is the better one. Yes, you're right. We've decided to do a podcast on romance because we think it's fabulous and we want to share our love of romance in all the forms. We thought we'd chat about some movies, TV, novels, and introduce our listeners to a wider range of stories. So, what are you thinking, Ray?
Well, I'm thinking this is going to be fun. Mostly because I've never done this before and I'm really looking forward to sharing all my favourites with everyone.
I am excited about that as well. Hopefully you will introduce me to some new things and maybe remind me of some of my favourite oldies and goodies. This is kind of going to be our virtual book club, if you will. So we're going to offer up some recommendations, then we're going to come back and discuss them. And so I'm hoping that our listeners will give us some recs. And so I think it would be a lot of fun if y'all could reach out to us on our on our social media. And so in that vein, I am familiar to maybe some of you as Palmetto Blue on Twitter, and I am a co-host on Say When, a geeky podcast. Don't tell my co-hosts. They don't know I'm doing this.
Believe me, I'm not going to say a word. I'm keeping the same secret from my work colleagues.
Shh. It'll just be our secret, but that's where you can find me on Twitter. Where can they find the podcast on Twitter, Ray?
They can find the podcast at ISN Romance, which is the only Twitter handle that was available, which really should be Romance Isn't Dead. Anyway, if you want to find us on there, we have been posting this weekend, and we've even got a poll up if you want to take part. Go ahead and join us. We really look forward to seeing you there.
Yes, last time I checked, we had a 3-way tie for favorite Starcrossed couple. So you need to get in on that, and maybe if we have not picked one that you like, maybe you should tell us in the comments, hey, you missed this one. So anyway, all right, well, Ray, could you let's maybe talk about some of our favorites, give everybody an idea of where we are and like our histories.
Okay, well, as you can tell, I'm English, but
she sounds very posh, doesn't she? I love it.
Thank you so much. I'm so not posh. This is an argument we have at work all the time. They say silver spoon, plum in mouth. Believe me, not at all. It just sounds that way. And I'm blaming the cold. Okay. To be honest, I started reading romance when I was about 11. Didn't have anything in the house. My mum was very, very classic in her books. Oh, and the horror. She loved Stephen King and still does. But I started reading romances when I got to high school. When I was 11, I came across a book called First Love, Last Love by Carol Mortimer, which is a Mills and Boon, and I have no idea whether it was in school. I really don't. It's so inappropriate.
I read that. First Love, Last Love?
Yeah. I still got it.
I think I read that.
Yeah,
Shut the front door. Okay, go ahead.
It's about a teenage girl. She was 18. So, again, so inappropriate. And she started seeing her boss. And he's a lot older than her. And he's her aunt, who turns out to be her mother. But that's a whole nother story. He's her direct line manager. He's the owner of the company. And he is seriously enamored of her. It's very, very Lolita, and wow, I just seen a car out my window crashing into another car and driving away. But that's a whole other thing. And then I was introduced to
wait. That's illegal. That's called hit and run.
Oh yeah, I know, but they've done it, and that poor red car is going to need a lot of work. But anyway, I'm not going to admit I saw it.
You can't say that.
And then I was introduced to the fantastic wonder that was Margaret May's The Changeover, actually subtitled A Supernatural Romance, about witchcraft. And it introduced me to the supernatural vein, which is where Buffy and Angel and Roswell come in my 20s. Good grief, my 20s. I so miss them. But today, of course, we're not talking about them. How about you, Sally? What sort of stuff?
I think my story is actually kind of similar to yours in that we didn't have a whole lot of romance novels around the house that I could get my hands on. And so a lot of my stuff started from the public library. And so, let me think. I think I've probably read my first romance novels when I was about 10 years old. And kind of snuck them. And but even before then, when I was little, I remember doing the summer book club at the public library, and I loved Rosamond Dujardin, and I have no idea if I'm pronouncing that correctly, so no one mock me. And the first book I read from her was called Young and Fair, and it was about a girl who was raised by foster parents. She got lost in the Chicago fire in the 1870s, and so she was raised as an orphan. Well, it turns out that she was actually the daughter of a wealthy family in Chicago, and the story is about her finding her true love and all that stuff. And anyway, so I loved Rosamond Dujardin, so I read all of her books that I could get my hands on, and the emphasis in those books tended to be, if you find the right dress and the right boyfriend, everything will be good and perfect. And, today that's just not going to fly. Kind of like the 18 dating your boss thing. That's not going to fly, right? I mean, oh my gosh. That boss would be in so much deep trouble, right?
Can you imagine the court case?
Oh my gosh. Oh my God, no, I can't. But to be fair to Rosamond Dujardin, she died in 1963, so she's writing in the 40s and 50s. So can we be surprised that the emphasis is on, do you look right? Do you have the right boyfriend? So I think her books are the ones that got me into romance. And I also, as a kid, read Sweet Valley High books. I remember sitting in the car and trying to read the book on the way home by the light of the headlights from the car behind me, because that was the kind of person I was.
I used to read with a book folded over walking home from school.
Oh,
I knocked myself out on traffic lights as I was crossing the road from the library to the town one day. Nice. Because I had a book in front of my face, heard the beep going to tell me I could cross the road, and just diagonally swerved and sort of banged my head on a bollard. That was fun.
So I think what we've established is that we are romance nerds from long ago.
Nothing wrong with that.
And so we will define our much maligned genre of choice, and these are ships that we will sail into the sunset. But I got into adult romance novels, like Harlequin Presents, and I've read, 100 or more of those. And I'm trying to think when I got into, more recently, the supernatural. I do love the supernatural genre, and I'm trying to think when I kind of got into that. And it's been it's been 15 years probably. So, I've been into that for a long time too. So,
yeah, my supernaturals, I'm so attached, and it was totally at the door of Margaret May, and I wished so badly that she'd write a sequel, that writing a sequel to that was actually my first foray into fan fiction.
Nice. I like it. I think my favorite, maybe my first vampire romance was the Christine Feehan Dark series.
Oh, yeah.
I think that might be my first vampire one. And then on my auto-buy list even now is Nalini Singh. She has an Angels and Vampires series, as well as something called the Psy Changeling series, and I adore those. I've only run across one Psy Changeling that I'm kind of like, I just can't quite get through it. I'm just a little bored by it. But I mean, she's 20 books in. If it took her 20 books to get to a point where I'm like, meh, that's a pretty good run.
It's not bad.
It's a pretty good run. And I'll still buy the next one because it might just be a fluke. I might just not connect to these two characters. So anyway, so those are our backstories. And today we thought we would talk about a trope. And maybe we should first define a trope because not everybody might not know what that is. So real quick, did you want to hit that, Ray? Tell us what a trope is.
Well, a trope is one of those cliches almost that is traditionally used across stories. So you've got, well, not only stories, movies, books, TV shows, the lot. It is, so for example, today we are going to touch upon the very, very well known and hugely overused Romeo and Juliet star-crossed lovers. But there are multiple tropes. You've got the, oh good grief, I'm trying to think of them. There are multiples of them. They are essentially cliches, hugely overused, and you can recognize them almost instantly. So you've got the woman who hates the man or the man who hates the woman, and they end up getting together, which is a very, very overused one in Harlequin, or as we call them over here, Mills and Boon. And I think that's probably the one that is most commonly used. You've got the man in power, or you've got the older man or the older woman, which is why they become what they are. They become cliches because they are used so much.
Well, I'm going to defend the tropes for a minute.
There's nothing wrong. Never said there was anything wrong with them.
Yeah, I mean, but tropes are tropes, right? There are certain universal themes, but tropes could also be story beats, right? It could be a trope like the weather turns bad and they're stuck in a barn together, or there's only one bed at the inn. Those are also tropes.
That is one of the biggest used ones in one of the fandoms that I read right now.
Yeah, and so the one bed thing is hugely popular with another period that I like, which is the Regency period, and like Stephanie Lawrence and all that stuff. So I can rely on her to throw in we're pretending to be man and wife, and they have to share a bedroom because there's only one room, right? I can rely on her to throw that one in. So
you certainly can.
Yeah, and that's fine. It's fine. It's good. And I think that's one reason why sometimes romance novels get a bad rap, because they do have some tropes and there is a certain element of predictability there. I think sometimes people are like, it's not good because there's predictability, and it's like, you say that, but I mean,
I find it comforting.
Yeah, I know. I want to have a happily ever after, and I'm going to have a happily ever after, and that's that. I'm just
no. Even if you sense it coming, there is that anticipation. The UST still builds up. You either like the characters or you don't. If you don't like the characters, put the book down and find another one. There are hundreds. As my bookcase can attest.
Exactly. Okay, so anyway, that's sort of where we're coming from, but we're going to talk about Romeo and Juliet today. And Ray, I think, kind of touched upon it, but this is one of my least favorite tropes.
Oh, definitely not one of my favorites by any means.
But it is hugely popular. I mean, you can find it everywhere. Everyone has heard of it, right? I mean, everyone has at least in the States, I think most high school students read Romeo and Juliet when they're about 14. I don't know. Do people read that one in England, or do they choose other Shakespearean plays?
We have a set thing that we have to follow. Every single school does read a few. They touch on a few, but it tends to be things like they do Macbeth and Romeo and Juliet, unfortunately. It is one of my least favourite plays by Shakespeare, and I actually studied Shakespeare at university for over a year and a half, and I really don't like it.
You don't like Shakespeare, or you don't like Romeo and Juliet?
Don't like Romeo and Juliet. Love Shakespeare. Hamlet's my all-time favourite.
See, I am a comedies girl. Give me a Much Ado About Nothing any day of the week. But anyway, it's fine. It's fine. It's totally fine. That's what makes the world go round, our differences.
Oh, definitely.
Whether it's science fictionally or romance novelly or romance or plays or whatever. Okay, so what are some of the movies that have touched on this, or some of the stories that have touched on this Romeo and Juliet trope?
Well, you've got the obvious ones like Romeo and Juliet by Baz Luhrmann with Leonardo DiCaprio and Claire Danes, which clearly is Romeo and Juliet. Then you've got West Side Story. Everybody, well, most people know that is a musical based on Romeo and Juliet. And then you've got Shakespeare in Love, which I didn't realise until I was doing some research is actually based on Romeo and Juliet, at least loosely. And then you've got the surprising ones you come up with. Most people are now aware that The Lion King, the original, is Disney's version of Hamlet. But The Lion King 2, Simba's Pride, is apparently Disney's version of Romeo and Juliet. Did you know that?
No, I have not. I've avoided Lion King 2, but anyway.
I'm not so keen on the straight-to-video releases that they do, although I have found myself on occasion sitting down and watching a Disney Channel movie when there's nothing else on TV. Another one is, I know, and another one is Warm Bodies, the zombie flick with Nicholas Hoult, which is apparently star-crossed lovers, zombie man meets human woman, and they run off into the sunset together, though obviously that cannot end well for either of them, or for one of them, seeing as one's already dead.
Well, yeah, let's not ponder that too deeply.
I don't think I want to.
Let's just not. Okay, anyone
of course,
else?
When you look at TV, you've got Game of Thrones, Starcrossed, which was about an alien and a human who got together when there was an alien invasion. It was a few years ago on CW. And then Shonda Rhimes did one of her usual, I'm going to make another TV show because I haven't got enough on, and released Still Starcrossed, which only lasted for half a season, I believe. And that was based on peripheral characters in Romeo and Juliet.
Okay, so we have all of these different, very popular ones. Do you have a favorite?
Me, none of those are my favourite. I'd say that if you look at the TV shows and things that I prefer, I'd say that Buffy and Angel in Buffy are definite star-crossed lovers. And, of course, you have Jane and Thor in Marvel Cinematic Universe and Marvel Comics.
Okay.
Because they're never going to stay together. They're never going to be able to stay together. Thor is an immortal god, and Jane is a human.
Well,
how about you?
Okay. Understanding, I hate this trope of star-crossed lovers, and I think we're using star-crossed lovers and Romeo and Juliet interchangeably in this case, right?
Oh yeah, definitely.
So
we can't not.
So, understanding that I am one of those people who often gets called trite because I prefer a happy ending. Star-crossed lovers are not going to be my jam, because if you're truly star-crossed, you can't ever be together. Not happily ever after. Not if you're truly star-crossed.
No.
And so that leads me to one of my biggest fandoms, which is the Star Wars fandom. And my, I guess, favorite, using air quotes there, is Anakin and Padme, or my favorite is Anakin and Padme, because they are star-crossed and they're destined to not be together. And she dies and he becomes Darth Vader, which is arguably even worse because he goes on to torture the galaxy for 20 years. So, I mean, it is what it is. But I feel like, I don't know that people really think of them as being sort of Romeo and Juliet, but I do. I really, really do. And I think that they fit that really well as Jane and Thor. And Jane and Thor don't have that same kind of tragic feel to me as, say, Anakin and Padme, but in some ways they are more tragic because they probably could be happy. And then he has to slowly watch her die, which is not cool. So, that's painful, y'all.
Think about it. He's already got 1,000 years on her when they meet.
Yeah. Ugh, I can't.
And then he goes away for what feels like to him a couple of weeks, and it's 2 years to her. So understandably, she'd have moved on because she's 2 years older, and he still looks exactly the same. Yeah. I mean, how's that fair? Come on.
Well, I mean, it would be the same if it was Sif and Immortal, but still, right? I mean, it would be the same if Lady Sif fell in love with a mortal man. She could go away for what felt like 2 weeks, and it turns out it was, 2 years for him, and now he's got a few gray hairs. So it's still not fair. You're right. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
It's not
but
fair.
Then you look at some of the guys with grey hairs and you think, hang on a sec, how come his grey hair looks better than mine?
Let's not even get into dignified versus old.
Yeah, let's not, especially with my next birthday coming up.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we've covered what a trope is. We've covered this specific trope.
Yep.
And I'm going to throw an 8-ball into this, or a curve ball into this. What's your favorite trope?
Oh, God. My favorite trope is probably the build of UST in man and woman hate each other. So very You've Got Mail. Mm-hmm. A woman thinks she hates man and is romanced by someone, and it turns out to be man she hates. I absolutely love that. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think I've written it a few times. No doubt I've written it a few times somewhere, but I love that whole build of the UST, and the hate actually is love. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What about, is there one that you like particularly, or do you just think, oh, okay, I can put up with anyone but this one?
My favorite trope, I am going to say something and then be like, I should have said something else tomorrow.
Yeah, of course you are, but that's what everyone does. Right. I'm probably going to come up with about 10 more when we get off this. I'm going to sit there and go, oh, blast it, I forgot about that one.
Yeah. I think I really do enjoy, if we're talking like narrow tropes, like a plot point, I really enjoy the whole, there's only one bed at the end kind of thing. Like, just, it's very comforting, that one. And I really like this is going to sound terrible. I really like the trope where they have to get married because she's been compromised, but she always figures out a way. And this is really big in the Regency.
Oh, good Lord. I think I've probably got about 10 books on my bookcase that have that particular trope in them. Yeah, but they all handle it differently.
Exactly. And that's what makes it so awesome. They handle it differently. And the way that the heroine inevitably says, I'm not going to marry you on the basis of some social nonsense. And then you know that she's going to marry him on the basis of some social nonsense. But that's okay, because they use it it just works in so many novels. And I think what people fail to understand, and what I never really thought about, I was listening to another podcast. It's called Meta Machina. And Otzi is a podcaster at Meta Machina, and they talk about genre fiction from a female perspective. And one of the things that she has said several times is that romance and books like this, in addition to being written by women for women, generally speaking, are actually female power fantasies. And I never really thought about it that way. And then I started thinking about it that way. And this trope actually goes into that, where you have, women saying, I'm not going to marry you on the basis of this. And almost inevitably at the end of these novels, the man is confessing his love for her and sort of not giving in or being submissive or anything like that, but just making her an equal partner in this relationship. And I can see where it is indeed a female power fantasy, but you don't necessarily think of it that way. Does that make sense? Right? I mean,
totally.
So
Austen was doing this 200 years ago.
Exactly.
Look at Darcy in Pride and Prejudice. He's the one that confesses his love for her.
Exactly.
And she rejects him.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's be honest. The first time he did it very, very poorly.
Oh yeah, he did it poorly, but he still admitted it, and it was his version of vulnerability.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because he was putting himself in a position of supplication almost. He was saying, I'm in love with you.
Mm-hmm.
I've tried not to, but I am. And she turns around to him and says, so, not interested, go away.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Although, obviously not in those particular words. And
right.
Good grief, I sound so illiterate right now.
Yeah, but that is one of those things that comes back up too. And to show my depth of Star Wars geekery, this is playing out again right now in the sequel trilogy. Kylo Ren has had sort of like, I don't remember who said it first, a Darth Darcy moment, where he has done this horrible proposal to Rey, and she's just like, no, go sleep on the couch after they blow up a lightsaber. And so you've got that, and they're also playing around with Beauty and the Beast, which is another one of these tropes. Like the woman unmasks this masked hideous feature or whatever, and it turns out that the hero or the beast isn't so beastly after all. And so they're playing around with that too, and so many people are watching the sequel trilogy and just freaking out about it because, well, let's not get into the politics of it, but anyway, I'm watching it going, oh, this is a romance novel. This is familiar to me. And so many people I know are like, what are you talking about? I don't understand. And they're mad at me, and they're mad at other women online who say the same thing. And I'm just like, okay, we'll see.
But could that not be the argument for them that women see romance everywhere because it's what they want? I mean, I'm saying this as a single woman who has only interest in romance on the written page, but it is one of those things I think that is always associated with women. It is a very, as you were talking about female empowerment and female strength, it is a very feminine-led genre in general, though one of the best and biggest tropes that is used everywhere was written by a man.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, no,
but having said that, he wasn't the originator of it, so
no, he ripped people off all the time. So,
oh yeah.
I would just say, just in general, that that's probably true. That it is a woman thing, but the reality of the situation is the sequel trilogy, to a large extent, with Star Wars, is being written from the feminine gaze. And they are actively trying to engage women in the fan base, and it's working. So, anyway, this podcast isn't about Star Wars. But I do see romance coming in that, and it's disturbing many of my male friends. And I'm just like, oh well. So, is that terrible? It's terrible. I'm okay with it, though.
Well, no, it's not terrible. I mean, you look at the MCU, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and the recently released trailer for Endgame, and you've got Tony Stark preparing to die, almost leaving a love letter of apology and farewell to Pepper Potts. Is that not romance?
Oh, yeah, it is. If it's not romance, it's certainly love.
Yeah.
And I have seen people make the differentiation between a romance novel tends to have a happily ever after, and then a love novel does not, like a love story does not. So like all the Nicholas Sparks stuff that inevitably ends with someone dying and then people crying. You know what I'm talking about.
I've never read a Nicholas Sparks.
Oh, sweet mother of God.
Please don't say that's going to be a challenge. I've never read a Nicholas Sparks, but I do, when it comes to love stories and things, I like to escape from the real world, so that's why every single one I read has a happily ever after.
Yeah, you mean you don't want to read a story that inevitably leads to the hero or the heroine dying tragically?
Funnily enough, no. I'm weird that
Sparks,
way.
Yeah, Nicholas Sparks, the books that get made into movies, inevitably it's a love story, but they're so depressing. And I mean, if I go to a theater and watch it, I can rely on doing a jerk cry.
So they're Romeo and Juliet.
They are star-crossed, yes, and that is apparently his favorite trope, therefore I am not a prolific Nicholas Sparks reader, and so he may well have books that end happily, but I'm not familiar with them if they exist. I'm sure he does.
Okay.
He has to.
If anybody has any ideas on happily ever after Nicholas Sparks, please leave a comment, because maybe that will change my mind on them. Maybe that will change Sally's mind on them. But in the interim, happily ever afters only.
Yes. That's how we roll here on Romance Isn't Dead, because romance isn't dead. So, anyway. All right, here's our deal. We thought that, as I said at the top of the program, that maybe we could do a virtual book club. And I think Ray's going to issue a challenge. And I think we do need to kind of go over our idea for the different books that we need to read. And so one of our qualifications is it has to be a book that we can still get our hands on, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely. If you can't get your hands on it and it's one that's been sitting on the bookshelf for a millennia and you're thinking, oh, well, I might encourage loads of people to read that, that's fantastic if it's one you can get hold of. If you can't, then are you going to be loaning your copy to everybody?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I would say, I'm going to try to make certain that any book that I pick is probably widely available on ebook. Or at a public library or something like that. And a lot of these classic novels that I've read are now starting to be available on ebooks. So that's good. I think we've got plenty of books we can talk about that are available.
Oh, yeah.
Widely available.
And one of my favorite authors recently released the majority, if not all, of her back catalogue of historical romances on ebook, specifically on Kindle, which is incredible because previously, my copies are actually falling apart, and sounds weird, but being in the UK, Amazon is one of the only places I can purchase a lot of these books because they're not available in my local bookshop anymore.
Yeah, they're out of print, so that's
not only out of print, just not stocked.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got that, and so we thought we would give us and our listeners, because we are busy people, 2 weeks to read the book if it's a book challenge. And so every other week, because we're planning on this being a weekly podcast, so every other week we will be discussing perhaps a television show or a movie or a movie series or something like that and talking about romance. So there may come a time when we have a podcast on Star Wars and I try to talk Ray into liking Star Wars. And I'm not holding my breath on that.
I haven't watched a Star Wars film since 1983, I think, when Return of the Jedi came out in the cinema. And I went and saw it with my dad.
You're breaking my heart. But anyway, moving along. So Ray, what challenge are you issuing to me and to our listeners?
This was a hard one. I actually was thinking about all the books that I absolutely love, and there is one romance novel that I literally will read at least once a year because I fell in love with the main the lead male character, and that is a book by Julie Garwood called Ransom. It's probably her biggest book, and it is one of her newer historical, in that it was probably released about 15 years ago, but it is incredible, and I'd love, if you haven't read it already, or if you have read it and it's sitting on the bookcase, or you know that you can get it at your local library, I think it's one of her best.
Okay.
So that's Ransom by Julie Garwood. So 2 weeks' time, it's going to be my pleasure to read it again, though I'm going to have to hide it in something else to read at work without comment, because I work with a lot of people that don't read romance novels, surprisingly. But I think that will be a really fun read and something exciting to talk about, because that builds on quite a few of the tropes that we've actually talked about today, including the needing to get married to save your reputation.
Yep. I would like...
And it's Highland.
Yeah. Oh, I love those. Let me add to that. I am a huge Julie Garwood fan of especially her medieval romances. And I think my favorite is Sweet something. It's about Gabriel and Johanna. Did you read that one?
Oh yes, I've got all of them on my bookcase.
Yeah, I think that Saving Grace. Is it Saving Grace?
Yes, I think so.
Yes, I think that is my favorite by her. But I am looking forward to rereading Ransom, because yes, I have read Ransom, and I will be more than happy to talk about this fetching hero.
Broderick, he's lovely. Yes. If you haven't read it, he really is lovely, and there's a lot of him in it.
Yeah, and then but isn't it technically Ransom's book or Ramsey's book, or is it Broderick's?
It's Broderick's book, and Ramsey is in it because, of course, it's part of a series.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. All right, well, I am looking forward to it, and we will definitely reconvene for that. And as for next week, I think we are going to talk movies. Romance and movies. So,
yeah, definitely.
A very specific movie franchise with which many of us are familiar. So, anyway, I sincerely hope y'all enjoyed our first episode, and I would love to, and I know Ray would love to, hear from our listeners. Where should we remind them where to find us?
Yeah, definitely. It's on Twitter. We're on ISN Romance. That's at ISN Romance.
Perfect. And if you want to touch base with me personally on Twitter, I'm Palmetto Blue, and I will probably be retweeting some of this stuff. So anyway, thanks for listening.
See you soon.
Bye.